The Genetic Lottery: Why DNA Matters for Social Equality by Kathryn Paige Harden. What does behavioral genetics mean? It is to explore how much individual behavioral differences are caused by genetic factors in the professional direction of behavioral genetics. Kathryn Paige Harden, American female scholar, a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, focuses on behavioral genetics. She has published more than 100 academic papers. Also, she won the Outstanding Contribution Award issued by the American Psychological Association. Buffett said he was superior in all aspects when she was a child. His family environment was perfect, his parents were knowledgeable, and he attended a good school. I was at the right time. Being born in a good place is like winning the big prize in the ovarian lottery. The so-called ovarian lottery refers to the impact of a person's birth environment on one's achievements. Generally speaking, if a person is born in a relatively stable society and developed countries, both parents have an excellent educational background and good income conditions, so the probability of one living a good life will be higher. No wonder Buffett said that he is the winner of the ovarian lottery. However, Harden, the author of this book, noted that in addition to the ovarian lottery, there is also a genetic lottery. Genes largely determine a person's appearance, height, learning ability, congenital disabilities, and proneness to cancer. Genes have a longer-term influence on individuals than family and social environment, and they deserve more attention. I will introduce the main content of this book to you in two parts. First part, what deviations have occurred in European and American countries' views on genetic issues in the past, and why. The second part, on the relationship between genetic differences and educational fairness, suggests expectations for future policy adjustments. First part, the misunderstandings about genetic issues in history. You must already know the concept of genes. It refers to the material in biological cells that can be inherited. The basic unit of genes is DNA. The double helix structure of DNA was discovered in 1953. In the 19th century, when Darwin proposed the theory of evolution, people had already realized that the color of a person's hair, whether one's eyes are nearsighted or not, these external physiological characteristics are determined by genetic factors. But is inner intelligence also hereditary? The first person to ponder this question was a British scholar named Francis Galton, Darwin's cousin. Galton wrote a book called Inheritance in 1869. The book lists the genealogy of hundreds of famous British families. He asserted that the best scientific, business, and legal talents in Britain at that time were all descendants of outstanding figures from ancient times. Therefore, intelligence and skill can be inherited to further improve the quality of the people. So he concludes that to improve the overall quality of the population further, besides encouraging the elite class to have more children and pass down favorable biological traits, it is also necessary to eliminate those bloodlines that do not adapt to evolution, thus prompting their extinction. From today's perspective, we indeed found that Galton's point of view is abusive. First of all, he confuses the dividends of the ovarian lottery and the genetic lottery. He does not see the influence of the family environment and only says that the success of the elite is due to higher intelligence, which is narrow. In addition, Galton also abused the concept of biological theory. For example, he described patients with genetic diseases as bloodlines that are not suitable for evolution and advocated weeding out these people. It is already blatant discrimination. However,
Galton's theory was very marketable in Europe and America in the 1920s. He used many statistical methods to prove the correlation between bloodlines and personal qualities active. A new science called eugenics was born, which is not the same thing we are talking about today, but is more extreme. Galton's German student, Professor Pearson of University College London, thinks that the 8-hour work system and the minimum wage standards should be implemented in enterprises. Pearson believes workers are poor because of their low ability and quality. Allowing these incompetent people to have time and financial resources to reproduce will only lower the quality of the British people. This eugenics has also attracted fans in the United States, the most famous of which is Laughlin. Laughlin declared that criminals, alcoholics, physically disabled, and homeless people are socially unfit. To prevent their genetic characteristics from affecting the nation, the U.S. government should legislate to prohibit them from carrying on the family line. Under Laughlin's lobbying, 18 states in the U.S. promulgated eugenic and sterilization laws until the 1970s. The irony is that Laughlin is a genetic epilepsy patient according to his definition. He should also be sent for sterilization according to the standards. From the 1920s to the 1970s, more than 60,000 Americans were forcibly sterilized in the name of eugenics, and many of them were hastily judged. There was a famous case in Virginia in 1924. That time, a mentally disabled girl named Buck gave birth to a child. His attending doctor happened to be a follower of Laughlin, who insisted on the sterilization of Buck. Buck's guardian appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court all the way.
Many fanatical eugenics advocates even colluded with the Nazi regime to demand that the so-called inferior races be sterilized. It is already an act against humanity. The author of the book, Harden, believes that although the rise of eugenics is earlier than modern genetic science, eugenics caused the first cognitive error humans made about genetic problems. This error is called oversimplification.
For example, height is a separate physiological characteristic. Current research shows that 80% of a child's adult height is related to the genetic genes of the parents. But there are not one but 100,000 genes that determine height. Any mutation or recombination will affect the final result. This situation is manifested between brothers and sisters. Most obviously, the author noticed that her height exceeded the average height of American women. But her younger brother was lower than the average height of American men. To find out why, Harden took her younger brother to do a chromosome test, which showed that siblings shared 44.6% of DNA fragments with her, which is lower than the average of 50% for siblings. Scientific research statistics also found that siblings shared only 37% of DNA fragments, which shows that inheritance is not a linear process, and there is randomness in it. Harden gave an excellent example to illustrate the complexity of random effects. There is a German scholar who is a friend of the Harden family. He made his specialty dish, lemon chicken, in the US. The scholar found that the taste was completely different from what he had made at home.
Several people have researched and found that the potatoes produced in the United States are softer than those made in Europe. Lemons are sourer than European ones. The quality of these side dishes changed the flavor of the chicken. In addition, the oven at Harden's home is better than that in Europe, so the temperature control needs to be more precise, affecting the final serving. In short, the German scholar follows the same recipe and cooks the most familiar way. What he made was a lemon chicken with an entirely different taste. Harden told us that the so-called gene is essentially a recipe made up of protein. Some DNA fragments belong to the coding gene, equivalent to the specific production steps such as oiling and baking. Some DNA fragments belong to the function gene, which is equivalent to the preparation instructions when cooking, such as thawing butter and slicing lemons. The expression of the gene in the protein is equal to the chef buying ingredients and preparing to cook. Even if the recipe is the same, slight differences lead to different tastes. For example, what if the chef adds a pinch of salt to the dish because of distraction? This phenomenon is like DNA duplication at a certain point, which may lead to congenital diseases. Small mutations are often unpredictable because of the complexity and changeability of genes. Author Harden fiercely criticized the basic assumptions of eugenics. He pointed out that the advocates of eugenics, represented by Galton and Laughlin, regard genes and all hereditary factors as variables that can be precisely controlled, which is invalid. Eugenics also divides people into different levels. The noble ones are more qualified to reproduce than others. This is outright racism. If the country wants to correct the influence of the randomness of the genetic lottery on ordinary people, it must not fall into the pit of eugenics. Let's think that genetic characteristics can be manipulated at will. Most countries have been marginalized, but with the deepening of gene research, ordinary people still worry that their children will be disadvantaged in social competition due to some uncontrollable genetic disadvantages. In response to this concern, British social activist Michael Young proposed a new concept that the governments of all countries. Michael Young said that in a rigid society, opportunities are always held by families with higher political status and wealth. The natural way out is to allocate opportunities according to the actual performance of each person. Simply put, it is to establish a set of well-known test ranking rules from the student days. Whoever has the highest score and the highest ranking can enter a better university and find a better job in the future. We are all too familiar with this set of philanthropic propositions called quality elitist. Only today is the exam-oriented education model still being determined in most countries. Eugenics are intellectuals who preach talent differences all day long. On the contrary, quality elitists don't mention talent and only look at the final result. After all, even if a person has a weaker learning ability and the speed of accepting knowledge is slower, as long as he is willing to put in more effort, he may still get good grades. You think that only grade is everything. Can ability be affected by genes? The so-called perseverance, curiosity, and these non-cognitive skills are also affected by genetic factors.
Harden led a study at the University of Texas at Austin through hundreds of pairs of twins. After testing, he was surprised to find that 60% of the 6 primary non-cognitive skills are affected by genetics. This ratio is very close to the heritability of IQ. In other words, a person's perseverance and good study habits may not necessarily be due to his extraordinary efforts. Harden's team's research shows that the heritability of such learning ability is at the same level as that of eye color and height. And the correlation between learning ability and test scores is between 40% and 50%. If you find that these victors are also born with the light of innate conditions, then hard work doesn't help. Harden also explained this issue. She said there is nothing wrong with quality elitists advocating individual hard work. But what's terrible is that they downplay or don't even recognize the influence of genetic differences. But they praise the subjective role of successful people too much unexpectedly. In the 21st century, those students who do not get good grades are considered incompetent and have a bad reputation for not working hard. We can't admit that some successful people may have won the genetic lottery and interacted with the environment to produce the final result. For example, a child with inherited excellent learning ability may speak worse. Still, if the parents do not interact with him enough early, his advantages will not be discovered in time. After all, the influence of genes is only a correlation, not a certainty.
In addition, Harden's research also found that some alleles that promote non-cognitive skills are also associated with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and also are linked with diseases like anorexia nervosa. In other words, the same set of genes can be advantageous in certain circumstances, but in a different environment, it might turn into a time bomb. That is why most countries still prohibit gene editing of embryonic cells in babies. Whether this editing will cause new health problems is still unknown, but that does not mean we can do nothing in society. The most essential thing in these policies is education. Most people acquire professional skills and ethics in school. The level of education also affects people's career choices. The second part, on the relationship between genetic differences and educational fairness, suggests expectations for future policy adjustments. The author said fairness is more important in the education process. Research data shows that in underdeveloped countries with poor educational conditions, the effect of genetic differences on individual achievement is entirely insignificant. This situation can also be called equality. Because the influence of genetics is completely ruled out, but it is not fair. There are no decent schools in the country to go to. Even if someone inherits the best learning genes, they will be well spent. Even most developing countries have improved the educational environment. In Harden's view, the approach needs to be revised. Building more school buildings and assigning more teachers can only achieve superficial equality of opportunity. In the actual education process, students are still prone to fall into the trap of superior technology. Students with more prominent genetic advantages get more preference and affirmation, and even develop into a severe Matthew effect. What should a genuinely fair education look like? Harden quoted a thought experiment proposed by economist Goldberg called the glasses effect. Genetic factors influence some people, and they are more prone to myopia. In this case, the invention of glasses can help them get better vision. Those unaffected by the myopia gene will not lose benefits from glasses, and even after they develop myopia, they can turn to glasses for help.
Harden believes that education fairness needs a mechanism similar to glasses, which wants to help children born with genetic disadvantages reach the general learning level of their peers more easily. Though it sounds like a sci-fi movie. Harden's education fairness is to sequence the genes of all students and then teach students by their genetic files. It also requires more work to operate. Some measures that help promote educational equity are straightforward. Harden gave an example. In the 1990s, most high school students in the United States were required to take at least one mathematics course when they entered high school. There were two mathematics courses. Point one is simple algebra, another is more complicated geometry. You can take a one-year calculus when you pass either of them in 2 years. Harden's research group has tracked 3,000 samples. She found that only 4% of students who took algebra as freshmen would finish calculus before graduation. In comparison, 44% of students who took geometry as freshmen will continue to study calculus. Graduates who study calculus lightly can enter top universities for science and engineering majors, which will affect their future career prospects and income levels. In the most extreme case, there is a total 18 times difference in career opportunities whether they learn calculus or not. Here, Harden began to feel that most first-year high school students in the United States are only 14 years old. How would they know that mathematics has such a great long-term impact? The 14-year-old children mainly listen to the teacher's advice on which mathematics course to choose, while teachers have yet to learn. Now, genetic differences start to play a role. Students who show some mathematical aptitude early on are steered to take more difficult geometry, and ordinary students are advised to take only the more accessible algebra class, which would invisibly set up obstacles for their future.
All first-year students must take 2 math classes so that even some students with average genetic talent can get in touch with calculus, which is a stepping stone for many universities and majors. It is a fairer educational mechanism. Not only that, Harden also noticed that some seemingly accidental kindness in the school will profoundly affect the life trajectory of students. For example, alcoholism is a habit that is highly related to innate genes. If students with alcoholism genes are allowed to drink alcohol from high school, it will have a significant impact on their lives. Some schools in the United States have offered management training classes for parents, allowing them to intervene reasonably in children's entertainment and social life. After this step, even students born with alcoholism genes will not fall into the black hole of life prematurely. Harden noticed that adolescent obesity is primarily influenced by heredity. Teenagers with obesity genes in the UK have a 20% higher risk of being overweight than others. However, the British government implemented a compulsory daily physical exercise schedule for teenagers at least 11 years old. In this case, the overweight risk gap caused by obesity genes has dropped from 20% to 6%.